Hello and welcome to Europa Universalis IV. In this video I'm going to explain how trade works. I know that many people, especially new players, are confused about this mechanic in particular, and I want to describe it in the most efficient way possible. For that I will jump into my Ottomans game. So I will first give the example on how trade worked, how for example the Railroad Tycoon 3 game worked. So it was a game about railroads, but also about the economy. And in that game you were first and foremost a railroad baron, which means you controlled the railroads, the stuff that connected uh, some goods to some other goods. So you were juggling between production and demand. You were shipping goods from where they are produced to destinations where there was a demand for those goods, and those goods could be transformed at the destination to some other type of good, and then you could ship those goods again to final consumers or some other factories and so on. But the beauty of Railroad Tycoon 3 was that you could also buy the manufacturers and the factories which produce the goods. So eventually you could control the whole chain. And it's very similar in Europa Universalis IV. So if you look at the income screen, the economy screen, you can see that you have three types of income: taxation, production and trade. And in production and trade are actually tied close together. So what is trade? Trade is divided into two distinct values. One is trade value and the other one is trade power. Now trade value is really depends on the type of goods you're producing. So for example, Basra is producing spices, and spices, considering how rare they are in the world, have a certain price on the market. So the current price for spices is 4.59 ducats per month, and I'm currently controlling, I mean not me, but the whole world is currently producing 45%, 46 almost, of the possible supply, and the demand is at 70%. So as you can see, the demand for spices is actually larger than the supply, which brings the prices up, and the current price of spices is very high compared to, for example, I don't know, fish, where the current price is 1.44 ducats per month and the supply is 105%, and the demand is 75%. So the demand is 30% lower than the supply. And why can the supply go over 100%? Because there are buildings that increase the production of certain goods, and that's why, well, the supply, 100% supply means unaltered, unmodified supply that's found throughout the provinces in this game. So let me talk first about trade value. So the trade value of spices is represented here in this screen. When you click on some province, you can see the trade value, and this trade value is transformed into goods produced. Now let me ignore the production, the money you actually get from production. So that's one thing. That's something that only this province produces, and you get money from simply producing the stuff, because that's how it works. I'm sorry, just a second. So that's one type of income you're getting from producing spices in this province. But the other way of getting money from it is being able to trade in it. And the more expensive the goods, and the better your provinces are equipped with trade power, trade value buildings, which is basically the more you produce, the higher the value will be. Well, based on the base value of the goods. That will generate trade value, and if you click the trade map mode button, you can see which provinces belong to which trade node, trade group, let's say. So these are like groups of provinces that transcend local empires, and so these are like these transcend political borders. So one trade one trade node or a group of provinces in one trade node can be split into several countries, like for example here in Germany, which belongs to like many small countries, or India is same thing. So all all provinces in one trade node group will pool all their trade value, so from each of the individual provinces, and they will trade with it, with those goods in one node, which is called the trade node. So all the goods, all the stuff that's being produced here in this trade node, for example, is coming from these provinces here in Basra region. Region is a good name for it. So all these provinces here, even the Timurids. So that's how the trade value works, and the trade value determines. So let me just hop into my Ottomans game, because this isn't my Ottomans game. Because I have some merchants there and so on. There we go. So that was the trade value, and you can see the trade value. I'm actually not sure. Yes, here you can see here, if you mouse over the local button in your trade node, which can be activated by looking at the trade map mode. You can see how much does each province contribute to the trade value of this trade node. So the total value of this trade node is 8.8 ducats per month, and there is some incoming trade value as well, which is, well, it's basically coming from India. And now, to actually be able, so the trade value does nothing for your income. The production of these goods is helping your income, because you're getting money from simply producing the stuff. But now the trade nodes basically represent your wholesale merchants shipping these goods across the continents and getting it to some final destination. And the general idea is that you bring all your goods either to your capital trade node, which is wherever your capital is. So my capital is in Constantinopolis here, so I'm within the Constantinople trade node. But if I would move my capital to, say, Zagreb, my capital would be in the Venice trade node. So the idea is that you move all your goods, all your trade value, to your capital trade node, and there you collect the money from all that shipping, all that trade that you do, the wholesale trade. Now, of course, the goods themselves don't end their journey in your trade capital node or capital trade node. They probably go further away, but the wholesale part ends there. And to increase the trade power, you need to build trade power buildings, which can be seen here in the trade. So as you can see, all these boost trade power. You can build light ships. Light ships increase your trade power by this value here. So light ships are very, very powerful in granting trade power. And there are also some provinces which by themselves provide greater trade power. For example, Rashid is the Nile estuary, and this provides 5 local trade power. The same is true, for example, here in Aleppo, which is an important center of trade, and also provides 5 local trade power, plus 5, and also some force limits. Or Constantinople, which provides, it's also an important center of trade. So the base values of provinces plus buildings plus some special features and plus light ships will determine your trade power in a certain trade node. Now, unlike production of the goods, which is trade value, a trade power can be contested for. So other nations can have provinces with high trade power in your trade nodes, and they can also send ships which will try to steal trade power from you. So for example, if we click on Alexandria, which is basically all my lands, but there are some other nations competing for my trade power, and as you can see, for example, Aragon is the second most powerful one, and he controls 53% of the trade power currently. And I don't know why I have so low trade power here, but that's how it goes. Actually, I think this is wrong. The values here are wrong. In any case, my trade power dictates. So what does the trade power do? Well, when you consider the trade value of the whole node, how will that money be, how that income will be distributed? Well, it will be distributed by comparing trade powers of different nations competing in the trade node. So, for example, in Gulf of Aden, my trade power is dominating. I have 81% of the trade power. So 81% of any financial transactions going through this sorry, is going to be dictated by me. And this is represented here, as you can see, by these values on these junctions, which says I'm controlling so much power that 16.99 ducats is being forced to move up to Alexandria, and that's because I decided to do that. But in comparison, for example, in Ceylon, I compare only a fraction, or even not even that much, of the trade power, and the most trade power is being controlled by Portugal. So this one is sorry, more evenly split up. So the idea is, once you have trade value, so the stuff that actually generates money, that value goes into the trade node, and from there merchants from various nations compete to see where that trade value will go, and that competition is called trade power. The higher your trade power, the more you will be able to steer that value to your capital node. And in my case, I'm in total I'm steering from passively steering from Astrakhan, I think, Crimea, 1.4 ducats. I'm passively steering from here, from Persia, 15 ducats, 6 ducats from here, from Basra, and almost 20%, 20 ducats from Alexandria. So all these values come to Constantinople trade node, and here is where I collect. Now here also is the competition the most fierce, because everybody can see that this is a very, very rich trade node, and everybody wants a piece of this. And that's why I try to focus all my trade power in this province, because this is finally where I collect that these trade amounts, this tax from trade. And so that's basically how the trade works. If you have any questions, feel free to ask on YouTube in the comments. I'll just refer to one more thing, which is the merchants. So you start the game with 2 merchants, but you can also get more, especially from, well, from ideas, but also from some events. And the merchants you send merchants into trade nodes, and merchants they can do 2 things. They can either steer trade or collect. So what does that mean? That means steering means that if you send a merchant somewhere, he will push the trade value to the destination that you desire. So let me just recall all my merchants. That would be the best thing to do. Just give me a second, please. Recall merchant and recall merchant. Now I have to wait for 60 days. Okay, great. So now, as you can see here, in Samarkand, which is one of the most ancient trade nodes in the world, I'm already steering passively 8.5 ducats toward my desired second trade node, which is Persia, because from Persia it can be shipped to Constantinople. But I can also actively steer it. As you can see, there is 2.64 ducats going someplace else, which is going to Astrakhan, which is not a desired trade node for me. Well, maybe it is, because it also leads to Constantinople. But for example, if I wanted to steer it from, I don't know, well, I control all the trade nodes here, but for example, let's say that these numbers were inverted, that the 17 ducats in Aden would go instead into the Horn of Africa. Currently it's going to Alexandria, but let's pretend it's not going there. I would need to send a merchant here, or let's say I want to steer into Africa. I would need to send a merchant here, and I will click the transfer power button and select a trader, and now I can manipulate these buttons, and I can tell him, okay, let's steer the trade over here. And as you can see now, the majority of income from this trade node goes down here. It's not beneficial to me, it's more beneficial to, I don't know, Portugal, but still, you know, I can manipulate where the trade value goes. So that's the reason why the merchants are very good at trade steering. So the passive steering will go if you control the majority of the trade power, it will passively go to the most desired destination for the trade node for your empire, which is up to Alexandria. If Portugal had the majority of the trade power here, the automatic steering would go down Africa, because that's where Portugal would collect eventually, in Seville. And the other thing the merchant can do is to collect money, to collect trade power, trade value. And to do that, you just click on a trade node and tell the merchant to collect from trade, like so. So trade gets collected in your capital trade node automatically. If you place a merchant there to do it as well, you will get a 20% boost in the amount you get from collecting trade. But you can also collect trade in any other trade node. Now the disadvantage of doing that is that only 20% of your trade power determines how much money you can collect from trade value in your non-capital trade nodes. So what does that mean? Let's say that Ceylon is a 50-50% split in trade power between the Ottomans, yourself, and Portugal. Now Portugal wants to steer away that trade value to Portugal. So it wants the trade to go from Africa all the way around to Sevilla. While you, for example, want to collect in Ceylon. And if you collect in Ceylon, what the collection does, since it's not your capital trade node, is that only 20% of your trade power will be effective in collecting. So although you, even if you have 50% trade power, only 20% of that 50% will be used for collection, and all the remaining trade power will be used by Portugal, and Portugal will steer that trade value away. So, in a nutshell, if you dominate a trade node, if you really dominate it, like having 85-90% in a certain trade node, you can collect from trade anywhere in that node, or in those nodes, if you control it almost completely. If I wanted to collect in Gulf of Aden, I wouldn't be doing a mistake, because I control like 78% of the trade node. If I wanted to collect here in Basra, I would be able to do it no problem, because the 20% trade power would be irrelevant since I control all of it. But there is one more advantage of transferring trade power, and that is that the amount, so the money gets, so the income from trade value gets increased for each trip it does across the globe. So for example, if these spices here from India, which are shipped over Indus and then Aden and then Alexandria and then Constantinople, are much more valuable than those shipped from Basra to Constantinople. So each hop increases the value of those spices. That's why it's extremely important for colonial powers to steer goods from as far in the world as possible to Europe, because these goods will go through so many nodes that their value can increase like double or even more. And I think that basically covers the specifics of trade. There are some other actions you can do, like embargoes and so on, but these are really this is really advanced stuff, and it really takes some effort to pull these off, to a questionable benefit. So yes, this is how basically you can earn money even as a continental power. If you have a lot of land and if you control a lot of trade nodes, you can steer most of them to your capital trade node. Now, I forgot a very important thing. The flow of goods, as I stated, like wholesale shipping of goods, can really work in only one direction, and this direction is represented by these arrows that are flowing from one node to the other. So for example, I cannot ship goods from Gulf of Aden to Indus, but it's naturally flowing from Indus to Aden, from Aden to Alexandria, and from Alexandria to Ragusa or Venice even, from Alexandria to Venice, to Constantinople and to Genoa. So when you're expanding, this is very important. If you're an expanding empire, it's always beneficial to expand in the direction from where the trade comes, rather than where the trade goes. So in my case, it's more beneficial to, I don't know, conquer Persia than it is to conquer Venice, because at least trade-wise, I'll be better off controlling this trade node and shipping all these 15 ducats to Constantinople for me to collect. So yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, guys, feel free to ask.